G'day, my name's Gregory Carroll. I'm coming to you from down under in Australia. And today I'm talking to you about risk intelligence, how artificial intelligence can be used in risk management. It's a field I've been working in extensively for over 20 years in both artificial intelligence and risk management. In fact, I think I was one of the first to implement artificial intelligence use in risk management for the Department of Defence in Australia. I've also worked in other clients like infectious diseases, health and mining. This is a subject I'm very passionate about, and I've written a book on it which is called Risk Intelligence, How Artificial Intelligence Can Be Used in Risk Management. And this talk is actually taken from that. Specifically I'm going to be looking at behavioural analysis, but the book covers a whole range of risk areas which I refer to as risk domains, from financial through to compliance risks. The session today I plan to cover behavioural analysis. It's just one section of the artificial intelligence use in risk management. I will then further go through and give a demonstration of some of the tools that are available today on the cloud that you can use to actually do this at home. Finally, I'll give you a set of resources of where you can find further information on it, one of them being my book. So, let's get started. I'd like to first go through the overall of using AI in risk management. My book, which is this talk's taken from, first covers the areas of risk that I referred to as the risk domains, covering the major categories of risk. I then go through and look at how AI can be used in each of those categories. The first thing you really have to understand is that AI is a mathematical technique for solving problems. As such, we need to convert risk events into mathematical problems. I don't want to bore you with definitions, but with the definition of risk being the uncertainty in your objectives isn't really helpful in solving risk issues. Really what we want to do is look at another definition, and I use uncertainty being the variation in your outcomes. If you look at it that way, it's then fairly easy to measure and therefore control those variations. So that's where we come from. Now, working out the variation really depends on how we arrive at the outcome. And that's my first major difference in the way we manage risk, is that risk needs to be managed as an event. It has a starting point and an ending point. The ending point being your objective or your outcome. The starting point is what causes the event to occur. In between, there are a number of different points that we will go through, and how that event unwinds is based on different decisions or factors that affect that path. So really what to do to manage risk is we've got to manage that path. We've got to understand what affects different points in that path and what we do about it. The way we do that is using scenario analysis. Now, scenario analysis that most of you think of isn't really scenario analysis. Scenario analysis in financial modelling basically is really just what-if analysis on an outcome. Real scenario analysis is looking at how that outcome comes about. It's the path that it goes through. And looking at each of the different steps through that, we can actually work out how each step is affected, and we can work out how that effect contributes to the outcome. Now, once we move it that way, we're then in a prime case for using artificial intelligence. Now, what affects each step is what I refer to as risk drivers. They're factors that occur in the environment which we're in, and it will alter what the original plan was. We measure risk drivers probabilistically. Now, there are a number of other sessions during this conference on probabilistic risk modelling, and I really suggest that you pay attention to them. But once you've got the ability to model the drivers, you've then got the ability to predict what's going to happen to them and how they're going to affect your outcome. We now have a method by which we can actually manage risk. If we can alter those risk drivers in real time, we can actually affect the outcome of our objective that we're planning. This turns risk into a proactive tool for managing your objectives. And it also allows us to introduce artificial intelligence into that process. Now, in the risk drivers within the risk scenario, one of the inputs is always going to be how people react, which leads us on to today. It means behaviour is a risk driver. Therefore, you need to measure it, you need to monitor it, and you need to control it. And that's obviously a political minefield. I will cover some points on that shortly. But it's a well-known issue that behaviour eats strategy for breakfast, so it's something we must manage. So let's look at behaviour and how we can manage it. Behaviour can be broken up really into two sides of it. There's the area of rogue or negative behaviour, and then there's the other side of it, which is stress. Let me just explain what you're looking at here at the moment. This is the output from another AI function referred to as knowledge graphs. Now, a knowledge graph is the output from a knowledge database. Now, a knowledge database is a different way of looking at information to what you're traditionally used to in normal databases. You can take input from a normal database, from your operations. It can also take input from documents, whether they be invoices, defect notices, or even correspondence. And what it does is identify the key elements of that, and more importantly, the relationships between them. Now, bringing this back to behaviour, if you look at that graph, you can see that there seems to be groups, which in AI we refer to as clusters. And that is normal in an organisation. The communications that are occurring will tend to occur between groups of people. And within that, there will be intergroup communications. If you're looking at rogue or negative behaviour, it's normally happening separate to the standard within the organisation. Just think about it. You have an organisational culture and people interact normally. When someone's going to act inappropriately, they will tend to separate themselves out of that normal grouping. That will show up in their communication, in emails, in their chats, in other type of correspondence. If we can actually monitor all this, it will identify fairly quickly where there are rogue groups occurring, or when negative behaviour starts. The other area we have to look at is the area of stress. Now, we all know about stress. It's like giving a presentation at the conference. It's something we all suffer and we all need to have it managed. So there is quite a well-known graph of stress, which is the Yerkes-Dodson curve. As you can see on the screen, it looks at how stress affects performance. Obviously, with too little stress, people are underperforming. We then move into the quadrant of where people have enough stress that they perform well. They then move into the exhaustion mode where they've got a little too much, but they're still performing. And then that moves into the area of overload, anger, and breakdown. Obviously, we want to try to maintain our staff, both for their own well-being and from a performance point of view, in that middle quadrant of efficient stress. That begs the question, how do we measure behaviour? Well, luckily, we have a wealth of information available to you in your communication networks within your organisation, be it email, chats, customer call logs. Even voice these days is over a digital network, and therefore those recordings can be saved and analysed down the track. With that information at hand, we can then measure the frequency of terms and sentiments, which is another area we can look at, which is sentiment analysis. Sentiment analysis looks at the content of a conversation and works out whether or not it's positive or negative, and even what emotions are involved in that. Now, to measure behaviour, what we want to do is count the frequencies. We're not interested in individuals, so this is where the whole privacy issue comes in. If we're not collecting the information on an individual basis, we can aggregate that information and look at the overall culture and happiness and well-being of our staff, and that is a good thing. Sentiment analysis. Sentiment analysis is a service that's available through the cloud by most of the main providers of AI solutions. That's Google, Amazon, and Microsoft. Now, Microsoft offer it in what they refer to as their cognitive services. That area covers a wide range of topics, including vision and speech to voice. But the area we're mainly interested here is the area which is referred to as natural language processing. And a subset of that is referred to as text analytics. Now, just let me show you what's quite possible on text analytics. What I have here is the Microsoft Text Analytics tool. It allows you to pass a set of text to the cloud service, and it will actually analyse it for you and return certain pieces of information. So let me start with, this is an extract of text in my book. It's from a comment made by an Oxford research fellow, just talking about the effect of climate change on Brexit. You think the two things aren't involved? Well, let's have a look. Well, by posting in the text here, I hit the next button, what it will do is, as you can see, it returns a sentiment score. And in this case here it's 89%. So the paragraph that I put in, it considers to be quite positive. Moving further, it will then go through and identify the key entities in that text. These are people or processes or places. And from that, it will then work out how we can actually pull out extra information for it. So as you can see here, it's highlighted Oxford and Syria and climate change and Brexit. Moving on from that, it will then link them through that knowledge graph we were looking at earlier and extract other related information to those key issues. Now, can you imagine if you had this available to you when you're looking at a problem, reading a letter, or talking to a customer? You can actually have on the screen in front of you all related information just from their comments. That's what analytics can do. Let me show you how we can actually use some of the services that are available on the internet today to do what we just talked about. Now, there are 4 major providers of AI services, which is Microsoft, Amazon, Google, and IBM. There are obviously a number of other smaller providers, but if you look at the major providers, all the things I'm going to show you would be available from any of those. But today I'm going to concentrate using Microsoft's tools just because they're fully integrated and they're easier to demonstrate. So these are the components that I'm going to be using. There's Yammer. Yammer is Microsoft's internal chat system, which allows you to have informal communication between employees. From that, I'll move on to Azure, which is their artificial intelligence platform. From that, I will generate a workflow that will then take the information from Yammer and put it into a Sharepoint list. And from that, we will send out notifications using Outlook. And finally, we can have a look at the statistics using Power BI. At the end of this chat, I will cover how you can set this up, what accounts you can use, and Microsoft provides free accounts for trialing this. And I will also leave you with some instructions step by step of carrying out this demo yourself. So, Yammer. Alright, not used a lot in most business today. My argument is it should be introduced. Most business today lacks informal communication between staff. The idea with setting up Yammer channels is to allow people to communicate, and in today's remote work environments where people are working from home in different times and different time zones, the ability to communicate has been lost. What I would refer to as the old water cooler conversations don't happen anymore. You need to introduce a service where that can continue, so people feel engaged in the business. Yammer is a process for that. The secret to setting up Yammer is to set up channels or communities based on people's behaviour and interests, not based on organisational groupings. So we will have ones for CEO and for other executives, but we also will have them for other interest groups. So people can join, people will have the ability to join their own communities within the group, whether it be for business or for personal interests. So, moving back. Well, this is Yammer. As I mentioned, it's a chat service available from Microsoft. It's part of the Office 365 suite of tools, along with Word and Excel and such. And you can set that up for different communities. Now, down the side here under Favourites are the communities I've joined to, and by selecting one of those I can look up what threads have been created in that. And conversations can be kept private or made public, as you would expect in most of these things. And you can actually pin conversations. So the idea here is that employees can jump in on their CEO connection and actually ask questions or make comments or suggestions to your chief executive or other senior executives within the organisation. This way you're actually engaging your staff, but also it allows us to therefore gauge their feelings towards the business and the culture within the organisation. So how do we do that? That moves us on to the main part of it, and that is this one, Power Automate. Now, Power Automate is a user-oriented workflow tool. By that I mean you can actually create your own workflows without programming and without any IT knowledge. In fact, when you go over here to the side, click on My Workflows, you can create your own workflows. There's a button up the top here, New Workflow, and you can create them from templates. So Microsoft provide a whole range, as you can see there, a whole range of developed workflows that you can then just call up and modify. And the one I'm using today is this one, which is the sentiment analysis from Yammer. So by selecting that template, it creates a blank workflow for me that has the following steps. As you can see, it's got when a new message comes into the group. So what this will do is it will actually monitor Yammer, and anytime something's posted into Yammer, it will actually fire this workflow off automatically. And from that, it will take the message, and the next step in the workflow here is detect sentiment. So it will then make a call to the Azure AI service for sentiment analysis, and it will return that, and it gives them the opportunity in the third step to store that information. So I can create a log and a history of everything that's occurring. And finally from that, based on what is returned, in other words, what sentiment is returned, I can then get it to, in this case, send an email. So that's the process. So starting with the blank workflow from the template that I loaded, the next thing I need to do is connect it to each of the other services. So I've got the connections here. And as you can see, for each of the steps, I can tell it where it's to get that information. So what I've got here is how it's going to connect to Yammer, and I can also specify whereabouts in Yammer it's to get it. I can then decide how it's going to connect to Sharepoint. So Sharepoint I'm using as a tool to store this information. I could quite easily be writing it to a database or to a text file and store it that way. But the Sharepoint platform allows me to create lists. So I've created a list here in Sharepoint under my site, and as you can see up the top on this tab, I've referred to it as sentiment analysis, and when I click into that, I've got a list here of all the different postings that are collected. Now, this workflow that I'm setting up here is obviously just using Yammer, but using any other connector into that workflow, I could also get it collecting information from emails and from chats and from customer service logs, a whole range of information. Now, as you can see in doing this, coming back to the actual workflow, again, there's no need for programming. You can see here the message. The first thing it's asking me for is what channel on the Yammer do I want to use, and it's a drop-down list, and I've selected CEO connection. It's telling me what network it is. When I then move on to the sentiment, detect sentiment, open that, it's asking me where I'm getting that from. So it's saying here I'm going to get that out of the message list. So it's going to get it from the message that's posted in the previous step. From that, create item. So the first item there is I've got to specify what the site is, which is the Sharepoint site, and then the list name, which is sentiment analysis in Sharepoint. And then it's asking me what do I want to store into that list. So I'm going to store the title, the score that's coming from the previous step of detect sentiment, and then finally an actual link to the message so I can actually analyse it down the track. Then finally, I've got what do I want to do based on I've collected this information. What do I want to do? So in this case, I'm going to say I want to notify somebody if it's a nasty or a bad negative comment. So on the step, down the bottom here, you've got expand conditions. If I click on that, I can put in a condition. So in this case here, I'm saying if the score is less than 0.5, so if it's between 0 and 0.5, I'm going to class it as being a negative comment. In which case, I want to notify somebody to follow it up, to find out why that staff member is unhappy. And I can do that by raising an email. So here, based on that condition, I've got a if yes and an if no condition. If it's not negative, I'm not going to do anything. If it is negative, I want to send an email out to our HR department to follow it up. So I can specify who I want to send it to, the subject, and this is here I'm saying it's a negative message has been posted, and I'm going to include the message in that. I can actually format that email. There's a template you can set up for doing that as well. Alright, so having set up that workflow, obviously I need to save it, which I have, and I can check to make sure that it's valid, so that I haven't made any mistakes in it. So if I click on this top here, which is the flow checker, it will come up and as you can see I've got 0 errors and 0 warnings. If there was something I'd specified incorrectly in there, it would have told me and it would have made me fix them. So I've got a valid workflow set up here, and it's set up to automatically fire when something gets posted to the CEO connection. So let's just see it. So top here I've got another button I can push, which is the test, so I can test this workflow. So by clicking on that, I can start it manually, which I want to, or I can start it automatically. In this case here, I'm going to do a manual test. So clicking on that, and I go test. So what that has done is the equivalent of posted that workflow into a production environment. So it's now sitting there waiting to see if anything gets posted into Yammer. So let's jump back into Yammer. So here I'm back in the CEO connection, and I can go in and post a comment. And I can say, why are we losing sales to competitor? Okay, so I go post. Alright, so that's gone through, and obviously the CEO would look at that and come back and hopefully answer me. But on the same time, it's automatically fired that, and if I now jump across to my email, I now have an email that's been generated. Let me just refresh that. And as you can see here, there's been a Yammer posting that's been changed. So it's raised an email to me. Also, if I jump over onto the Sharepoint site, click on the sentiment analysis, you can see that it's been posted in here as well. So that's building up. So now I've got a list of all the postings that are negative. I've also had an email that's gone to the HR to tell them that they need to follow up on it. And finally, I can then export it out or call in Power BI. Excuse me. Power BI. Now, Power BI is a tool like Excel, but it's a lot more user-friendly and it's easy to do. Again, through just dragging and dropping, you can build dashboards. Let me have a look at the one I've set up here. So going to my site again. Here we go. As you can see here, I've got on my internal site, I've got a graph set up for the internal sentiment, which I can open. And it loads the data. And now I can analyze what's been happening in our system. So here it's kept track of keywords that it considers to be indicative of sentiment. So I've got words like anticipate or joy or perfect, good, top. They're all positive type terms. And I've also got over here the actual tracking over time. So this is a trend. So we can see here that over time between 2012 and now, the sentiment's increased. So we've been improving, but then suddenly we've had a major drop off in the last year, and that's obviously due to COVID. So at any point of those, I can click on them and look further. I can also dive in further and say there's some fear that's been raised in some of these. So let's have a look and see why there's fear. And it's got fear words down here of lack of confidence and loss and such. So anyway, that'll do on that. So that's the type of thing we can put together. You can do that fairly quickly. So next, let me have a look at what you need to do to be able to set this up. Okay. So there we go. So what I just showed you was we took information that's passing through the organisation In this case I showed you Yammer, but we could also do it from emails and through any other workflows you've got. We've taken that and created an automatic workflow that will pick that information up, rate it using an Azure text analytics service for sentiment analysis, and then stored it in a Sharepoint list and analysed it using Power BI. All of that was done without any code, what's generally referred to as a no-code solution. In other words, you as the business analysts can actually put that together yourself. So how would you go about that? Well, the first thing you're going to need is, in this case, to repeat this Microsoft demo, you'll need some Microsoft accounts. First of all, you'll need a Microsoft 365 subscription, and in my case I used an E5 level license. Most likely your organisation probably has Microsoft licenses already, and you can just use those. The next thing you'll need is the Azure Cognitive Services. It's an additional cost to the normal one, your normal Azure services, but you can get a free 90-day trial of that to sign up for it. Second thing to that is you may need some IT help for setting up access to that service. And then thirdly is you'll need your Power BI. Now Power BI, you can get a free license to that, but to be able to have the interactive dashboard where other people can click in and dive in further, that does require a Power BI Pro license. Again, you can get I think it's a 60 or a 90-day trial on that service, and to play around with what I've shown you here. The slides that will be accompanying this talk today include links to instructions on how to carry out the demonstration I just showed you. So this first one, as you can see, is a fairly detailed step by step. Tells you about the license you need. There's a download of the workflow that I showed you that you can then just set up. It goes through how to set up your Yammer accounts, how to connect to Sharepoint, and how to utilize the Azure services. As you can see, there's screenshots, and it's fairly straightforward. You should be able to follow that without much trouble at all. Also, I've got links here that are for embedding web parts into SharePoint, so how you can embed a BI dashboard into SharePoint, how to create a dashboard, and also there's also a link to another service that Microsoft provides, which it calls its Workplace Analytics, which again, using the same technology, is analysing communications to see where and how employees are working within the organisation. There's also the final link there, that text analytic tool I showed you earlier on, so you can play with that yourself. Well, that's all I've got to cover today. Thank you for your time. As I mentioned, this is an extract from my book. It's available on Amazon, Risk Intelligence, for $34.99. And as an attendee, you can get a 25% discount on that if you just follow the link. And finally, I'd like to hope that I've covered with you how you can actually implement artificial intelligence in risk management without any great expertise and without any technical background. So here are my contact details. Please reach out to me if you want to discuss anything further. Thank you.